The first step on a 1,000-mile journey. A bold claim on the vital center. Setting the stage for a strategic dance where control of the king's pawn's destiny is paramount. The classic knight's gambit. A swift sidestep into the realm of flexible possibilities. Promising a duel of wits from the very first breath. A bold declaration. White seizes the center, forging a territorial claim that dares black to challenge its dominion. Like a general raising a standard on contested ground. The classic * Queen's Indian setup. Black, a seasoned diplomat, chooses to sidestep the main lines, opting for a flexible pawn structure that whispers promises of solid defense while keeping a keen eye on the center. A subtle declaration of intent to dance on the edge of White's ambition. Nf3. The knight, ever the chivalrous knight, steps forward, not to charge the center directly, but to offer subtle, yet undeniable, support. White, like a seasoned diplomat, is weaving a tapestry of influence, preparing to solidify control without declaring war prematurely. The Queen's Gambit declined. A classic tale of positional warfare. Now met with a resolute d5. Black, refusing to be bullied, stakes their claim in the center, signaling a titanic struggle for central control is about to unfold. A handshake of steel. nc3 asserts its dominance, signaling White's readiness to transform this solid Queen's Gambit declined into a strategic battlefield ripe for exploitation. The curtain rises, and Black, rather than a flamboyant gambit, opts for sensible development, reinforcing the center and preparing to castle. It's the quiet confidence of a seasoned general consolidating their position. The benevolent bishop emerges, ready to tie White's pieces in knots and challenge Black's very intentions. This isn't just a development. It's a subtle declaration of war, hinting at the intricate dance of sacrifices and positional pressure to come. The knight's pawn pushes, a bold hand raised in defiance, demanding the bishop reveal its intentions or retreat. A classic psychological gambit. The immediate sacrifice of the bishop. A move that whispers promises of dynamism, yet carries the grim weight of long-term consequences. White, tired perhaps of the knight's persistent pin, decides to shatter the pawn structure. A calculated gamble akin to burning bridges behind you in a desperate attempt to outmaneuver an opponent who, until this moment, seemed content to march steadily forward. Now, Black faces not just a repositioning, but a fundamental alteration of the battlefield, a tactical crossroads where the pursuit of activity might just unravel into a structural nightmare. The bishop, having just been summarily dismissed, returns to the fold, a wounded soldier rejoining the ranks. This isn't just a recapture. It's a statement of intent. Black says, "You broke my pawn structure. All right, but you haven't broken my spirit, nor my kingside integrity. The doubled pawns are a sacrifice. Yes. But in return, Black gains a dynamic bishop pair, a pair of eagles surveying the battlefield, ready to exploit any weaknesses the White King might reveal in the coming storm. A strategic gamble, betting on the long-term positional advantage over immediate material equality. The quiet hum of strategic repositioning, like a master chef adjusting seasonings. White, having traded off that pesky bishop, now opts for a modest yet fundamentally sound approach. It's not a Hollywood stunt. No, this is about solidifying the pawn structure and preparing to castle into safety. Think of it as building a sturdy foundation before the real fireworks begin. The game, still in its nascent stages, suddenly feels a touch more grounded. A subtle shift from chaos to calculated order, promising a slow burn of positional maneuvering rather than an immediate blitzkrieg. And with that, the Black King scurries to safety, like a seasoned explorer finally finding their tent after a grueling trek through uncharted territory. A necessary precaution before this intricate dance truly begins to unfold. The rook marches to the forefront, a seasoned general surveying a battlefield transformed by the recent exchange on f6. White, having shed an electron of pressure, now seeks to harness the open c-file, a highway to black's kingside, while simultaneously reinforcing that ever-crucial d4 pawn. It's a calculated gamble, a quiet yet potent declaration that the game is far from over, and the real struggle for central control, and ultimately, victory, has only just begun. So, the dust has settled on white's bold queen's rook venture to the c-file. And black, after a moment's deliberation, a silent calculation of the storm brewing, gently nudges forward the c-pawn. It's not an aggressive charge, mind you, more of a strategic anchor. A quiet fortification that shores up the d5 pawn and prepares for a potential kingside assault later. Think of it as a seasoned general, not rushing headlong into battle, but meticulously securing their supply lines before the real fireworks begin. This pawn's advance isn't just about defending. It's a statement of intent, a subtle declaration that black isn't about to be bullied. The knight, now unburdened by the bishop's capture, takes its rightful place on d3, a move that whispers of subtle rearrangement, like a seasoned general repositioning troops before a crucial flanking maneuver. White isn't just developing, they're carving out a commanding presence in the center, preparing to support a pawn thrust, a patient buildup that reminds you of a slow-burn thriller where every quiet moment amplifies the anticipation of the explosion to come. The knight, now freed from its defensive post, embarks on a journey towards the center, a subtle yet potent declaration of intent. Prepare for the central skirmish, a strategic ballet where control of the crucial d5 square will soon become the grand prize. The king, a fragile monarch, finally finds sanctuary, but in doing so, white has expertly tightened the noose around black's central ambitions, transforming a dynamic opening into a strategic siege. The pawn snatch. It feels a bit like a gambler cashing in their chips early, doesn't it? Black, having carefully built a solid structure, decides to take the bait, liberating a pawn but, in doing so, surrendering a crucial central outpost. White, with a twinkle in their eye, now has the perfect excuse to reclaim that central square and solidify their positional advantage, setting the stage for a slow, grinding siege. The pawn structure is now solidified, but that recapture, while seemingly logical, has just handed white a precious tempo, a subtle whisper of advantage that could ripple through the entire middle game. Much like a well-placed remark in a tense negotiation, forcing black to re-evaluate their defensive posture and perhaps, just perhaps, sparking a flicker of doubt in their carefully constructed plan. A seismic shift has just occurred, a bold gambit to shatter the symmetry and inject chaos into this once calm position. Black, after meticulously developing and even seeding the bishop pair, now unleashes a pawn thrust that rips open the center like a curtain, promising a whirlwind of tactical skirmishes. This isn't just a pawn push. It's a defiant declaration, a signal that the quiet maneuvering is over, and we're about to witness a passionate, potentially double-edged, embrace of complexity. Forget about textbook maneuvering for a moment. This is about nerve, calculation, and the sheer audacity to complicate matters when white seemed content with a slight edge. White, after a slight positional skirmish, seems to be planting a tiny flag of psychological reassurance, a subtle handshake to the king's knight, essentially saying, "Don't worry, little guy, no immediate threats here, but let's keep an eye on that advancing e-pawn." Because suddenly, This seemingly quiet position is about to get a whole lot louder. Ah, the pawn's fateful dance. A sacrifice whispered in the language of queens and kings. As black surrenders the central pawn structure. A bold gamble to shatter white's harmonious development and unlock a potential counterplay that might just unravel the entire position. A calculated risk in the grand theater of the mind. Ah, the bread and butter exchange. The pawn peeling off the center like a stubborn sticker. And now, white's recapture. EXD4. Unleashing a storm of possibilities where black's kingside defense, once so snug, now feels a touch exposed. It's the moment the carpenter realizes they've just hammered their thumb, a slight discomfort. Perhaps. But one that opens up new avenues for counterplay. A slight shift in the very fabric of this seemingly tranquil queen's gambit declined. Ah, the knight's audacious gambit. Suddenly, the center feels less like a fortress and more like a battlefield where brave knights charge into the fray. Black, having shed their pawn structure like a molting snake, now unleashes this nimble warrior towards the *b6** square. This isn't just a repositioning. It's a declaration of intent. A whispered threat to white's central control. A subtle nudge asking, "Are you truly comfortable with that pawn-laden king?" It's the equivalent of a seasoned poker player pushing all their chips forward on a seemingly quiet street, forcing white to reassess their entire hand and wonder if they've underestimated the quiet menace brewing in the shadows. Suddenly, the bishop on b3 orchestrates a silent but potent repositioning. A tactical withdrawal that's less about retreat and more about a strategic redeployment. Like a seasoned general repositioning artillery. White, having just nudged that pawn to h3 in a move that felt more like a polite cough than a decisive blow, now aims to avoid the rather awkward pin it might have faced on c2. It's a subtle dance of influence. Eyeing the kingside and the d5 square with renewed purpose. A silent promise of future pressure. Think of it as the calm before the storm. A moment of quiet calculation before the real fireworks begin. Black, meanwhile, might be tempted to feel a fleeting sense of relief. But make no mistake, this bishop's new perch is far from benign. It's merely shifted from one strategic vantage point to another, ready to rejoin the fray with a different angle of attack. The queen's gambit declined. A classic battlefield has seen kings castled to safety, knights poised for a skirmish, and bishops locked in silent contemplation. Now, black, after a calculated exchange on f6 and a strategic retreat of the pawn to d5, has initiated a daring pawn push, momentarily surrendering the center only to reclaim it with a more active bishop. White, with their meticulously placed pieces, has countered, aiming to solidify their queenside presence. But this move, bf5, this is where the gloves truly come off. It's a declaration, a bold statement that black isn't just defending. They're looking to dictate the tempo. This bishop, no longer passive, swings into action, eyeing that vulnerable d3 square and preparing to stir up trouble on white's carefully constructed pawn chain. It's like a seasoned detective, after patiently observing, suddenly pointing a finger and revealing the crucial clue. The game just got a whole lot more interesting, and white needs to think very, very carefully about how to respond to this newfound aggression. The rook, finally unshackled from its defensive post on the c-file, swaggers onto the e-file, a knight of the realm asserting its authority. It's a bold declaration, a king surveying his newly conquered territory, and it whispers a quiet threat to the entire queenside, even if it's not immediately obvious. Think of it like a seasoned detective, casing a joint before the real action begins. It's repositioning, consolidating, preparing for a raid on the enemy's weaknesses, which, in this particular tableau, lie subtly scattered across black's pawn structure and the vulnerable squares around the king. This isn't just about controlling an open file. It's about building pressure, creating options, and forcing black into a defensive posture where every pawn push, every piece movement, will be scrutinized for potential tactical traps. White isn't just moving a piece. He's orchestrating a symphony of positional advantage, each note building towards a crescendo of inevitability. Suddenly, black, having danced around the central skirmish with knightly grace, makes a bold, almost audacious bid for space on the queenside. This A5 isn't just about pawn pushing. It's a declaration of intent, a bid to wrest control of the c4 square from White's tenacious bishop and, by extension, to dismantle the delicate pawn structure that White has so carefully constructed. Think of it as a strategic pivot, shifting the focus of the battle from the cramped center towards the open flanks, forcing White to confront a new dimension of pressure that could unravel their defensive fortress. If not handled with the utmost precision, this move signals a departure from the positional niceties, embracing a more dynamic, territorial struggle where a single pawn thrust can redefine the entire landscape of the game. White, faced with black's ambitious pawn advance and a rapidly developing piece play, chooses not to sprint, but to meticulously reinforce. It's the strategic equivalent of building a stronger foundation before attempting to scale the skyscraper. A subtle yet profound statement. I see your initiative, and I'm not going to be easily dislodged. This seemingly quiet inscription on the board is a psychological nudge, a whisper in the opponent's ear that White's position is about to become as unyielding as granite, preventing any potential knightly incursions on the queenside and preserving the structural integrity of the pawn chain. A subtle victory in positional warfare that sets the stage for a deeper, more intricate endgame. Suddenly, the seemingly quiet position erupts as the black rook on f8 awakens, marching with purpose to e8, mirroring White's own rook on the same file. This isn't just a repositioning. It's a declaration of intent, a cavalry charge down the open highway of the e-file, directly challenging the White King's sanctuary. Think of it like a seasoned detective finally getting the breakthrough he needs, kicking down the door to confront the suspect. Black's pieces have been strategically shuffling, like witnesses being interviewed, but this rook move is the smoking gun. The pressure on the e3 pawn intensifies, forcing White to consider immediate defensive measures rather than continuing their seemingly innocuous pawn storm preparations on the queenside. This pawn storm? It's now looking less like a grand siege and more like a hasty skirmish on the perimeter, as Black's central forces are suddenly very interested in the king's immediate vicinity. The air crackles, a silent prelude to exchange, as White's rook, having bravely ventured across the battlefield, now sights its counterpart. This isn't just a tactical exchange. It's the meticulous unwrapping of a gift box. Each capture reveals a new strategic landscape, demanding fresh analysis and a recalibration of intentions. Imagine a seasoned negotiator, after careful deliberation, deciding that a concession, a seemingly minor trade-off, will unlock far greater future gains. White is opting for clarity, for simplification, perhaps sensing that the ensuing endgame, with its clearer lines of attack and defense, will be more to their liking than the current congested middle game. It's a calculated risk, a subtle shift in the power dynamics, whispering of future pawn pushes and calculated king marches, all built upon this seemingly mundane, yet profoundly consequential, rook sacrifice. The queen, finally released from her gilded cage, descends onto e8, a master conductor now stepping onto the podium, ready to orchestrate the symphony of this endgame. The queen, finally liberated from its sheltered upbringing on d2, surveys the battlefield, a strategic pivot that instantly reconfigures white's ambitions, aiming to reroute this potent piece towards the exposed black king. A bold declaration of intent that whispers of impending queenside pressure or a swift transition to the kingside assault, much like a seasoned general repositioning their most valuable asset to exploit a newly discovered vulnerability. The knight, having completed its circuitous journey from f6, now plants itself defiantly on d7, a silent sentinel surveying the open central files. A bold assertion of its strategic repositioning after the queen's rather unceremonious eviction from e8, hinting at a deeper, more intricate plan to perhaps disrupt white's centralized bishop on b3. Or maybe to reroute itself through c5 for a potential kingside incursion. A subtle dance of calculation and anticipation that transforms this seemingly quiet placement into a coiled spring of future possibilities. The queen boldly struts to f4, a daring dance onto an exposed stage, instantly transforming the sterile, positional skirmish into a pulsating hunt where every pawn feels the chilling breath of its pursuer. White, having patiently orchestrated a symphony of strategic repositioning, now unleashes a melody of aggressive intent, aiming not just to win material, but to shatter black's fragile pawn shield and expose their king to a chilling existential threat. This isn't just a check. It's a declaration of war. A pivot from the measured footsteps of queenside expansion to the thunderous charge of a central assault, forcing black to abandon their comfortable defensive posture and confront the storm head-on, lest they find themselves swept away by the relentless tide of white's initiative. The bishop, now freed from its pawn-chain prison, stretches its wings, a peacock unfurling its tail on the regal square h7, not just to eye that vulnerable pawn on g2, but to fundamentally question the king's sanctuary. This isn't just about material. It's about psychological pressure, about whispering doubts into the white king's ear, a phantom menace now perpetually lurking on the edge of his perception, promising a future where escape routes narrow and the shadows lengthen. White just made a move to solidify their king's side, and black immediately responds by inspecting that solidity with a newfound, menacing peace. It's like leaving your valuables in a perfectly locked safe, only to realize a skilled locksmith has just entered the room, not to steal them yet, but to let you know they could. A calculated gamble. This humble pawn push, 20, h4, transforms the serene landscape into a potential battlefield, a strategic pivot reminiscent of a seasoned poker player pushing all their chips to the center. White, having meticulously cultivated a solid pawn structure and a developed army, now subtly probes for weaknesses, not with a frontal assault, but an insidious creeping advance. It's a psychological maneuver, an unsettling whisper in black's ear. I'm not just defending, I'm building an escape route, a secret passage to your king's backyard. By creating this distant pawn storm, white aims to distract black's pieces, perhaps drawing the knight from its influential d7 post, or even tempting a pawn sacrifice that could unravel black's carefully constructed defenses. This isn't about immediate destruction. It's about planting a seed of doubt, about forcing black to confront a new, uncomfortable dimension of the struggle, turning a positional game into something far more volatile. The queen, that battlefield monarch, now finds herself sidestepping the pawn storm on the kingside, a classic maneuver designed not just to avoid immediate danger, but to reposition for a grander, more insidious purpose. It's like a seasoned diplomat realizing the banquet hall is getting a bit too rowdy and deciding to retreat to the war room. The real decisions are made away from the dazzling chandeliers. Black, having successfully navigated white's aggressive pawn thrust with the h-pawn, now looks to redeploy this powerful piece, Think of it as a skilled boxer pulling back their jab. Not out of fear, but to set up a more devastating counterpunch. Perhaps a probing attack down the c-file or a sneaky infiltration into white's queenside. This isn't just a passive retreat. It's a strategic recalculation, a whispered promise of future complications, forcing white to consider every potential threat, not just the ones currently staring them in the face. The queen, once the center of attention, now becomes a ghost, a phantom menace, its true intentions shrouded in tactical fog. The cavalry has arrived, a gleaming knight charging onto the flank, not to attack, but to reposition and prepare a siege that will test black's central grip like a seasoned interrogator. The silence on the kingside is deafening, a tactical vacuum begging to be filled, and black, with a flourish reminiscent of a medieval banner unfurling, chooses this precise moment to plant his pawns like fortifications, daring white's ambitious knight to find any purchase on this newly constructed rampart. The rook, finally awakened from its slumber on the h-file, now reclaims its rightful place on the e-file, not merely as a pawn pusher, but as a strategic sentinel, preparing to join the fray and exploit the lingering imbalances that have been meticulously crafted over these opening skirmishes. With a sudden, audacious thrust, black ignites the queenside, transforming a seemingly quiet positional battle into a volatile frontier where the queenside pawns, like defiant villagers storming the castle, surge forward, threatening to overwhelm white's carefully constructed defenses and reshape the entire strategic landscape. And with the knight's repositioning to c3, white decisively signals a shift from passive maneuvering to active central influence. A subtle yet potent declaration that the pawn structure, once the subject of white's careful arrangement, will now become the battleground for controlling the vital e5 square and launching an assault on black's kingside. A bold gambit of presence. Queen to b8 reroutes the royal gaze, transforming a static threat into a dynamic expedition towards the kingside flank, aiming to pry open avenues for penetration and disrupt the carefully constructed pawn fortress that has been white's bastion thus far. And just as the dust begins to settle from the queenside skirmish, white unveils k3, a subtle but profound repositioning that transforms the seemingly static pawn structure into a dynamic battlefield, forcing black to confront a looming cavalry charge aiming directly for the kingside fortifications. The board quivers as black, emboldened by white's recent retreat, unleashes a daring pawn thrust. A bold gambit aimed not just at territory but at disrupting white's meticulously constructed queenside. It's the chess equivalent of a perfectly timed economic disruption, a lightning strike against the established order, forcing white to reassess their entire strategic framework, threatening to unravel the very fabric of their positional advantage. And with a sudden cavalry charge, white's knight leapfrogs into the fray. A brazen declaration of intent, not just occupying territory but actively threatening to shatter black's carefully constructed pawn shield, forcing a vital decision. Does black dare to stand firm against this metallic steed, or will they flinch and retreat, surrendering the initiative in a game that's rapidly escalating from a positional wrangle to a full-blown tactical skirmish? With a defiant slash, black carves open the queenside, a desperate gambit born from a cramped position. It's the equivalent of ripping up the blueprints mid-construction, hoping to expose a weakness in white's seemingly impregnable fortress. The pawn on a3 is a Trojan horse, a shiny lure promising positional indigestion for white, but its capture will invite the nc3 knight into an unsettlingly advanced outpost. A knight suddenly finding itself in enemy territory, far from its king's protection. This isn't just a pawn sacrifice. It's a desperate plea for active counterplay. A gamble that white's queenside expansion will become overextended, ripe for a tactical strike before the king can be properly secured. A calculated hammer blow, finally connecting with the black king's fragile structure. The knight, finally unleashed from its pawn cage, now charges into the heart of white's position, not just seeking material gain, but a crucial pawn structural advantage that promises to unravel white's carefully constructed defenses. The pawn structure is now irrevocably fractured, a battlefield scarred by exchanges, and white, with this seemingly simple pawn push, is not just reclaiming material but fundamentally altering the very breathing room for black's pieces, forcing them to second-guess their positional advantages. Suddenly, the knight leaps to d5, a bold cavalry charge into the heart of white's territory, not just to eye the pawn on c3, but to fundamentally alter the game's texture. This isn't just about occupying a central square. It's a declaration of intent, a defiant pivot that transforms black's passive defense into an active threat, a strategic gambit to reignite the dormant queenside pressure that white, perhaps too comfortably, had relegated to the sidelines. The suffocating grip tightens as white trades off those vital dark-squared bishops, effectively dissecting black's king's safety and setting up a potential pawn storm on the kingside. A calculated gamble, you might say, like a chef removing a key spice from the dish, changing the entire flavor profile and leaving black scrambling to find a new culinary masterpiece. The chessboard, a battlefield of minds, now witnesses a pivotal decision. Black's pawn, that humble foot soldier, steps forward, embracing a doubled fate. It's a choice born of desperation, perhaps, or a calculated gamble, like a gambler betting their last chips on a wild card. White has just orchestrated a brilliant exchange, sacrificing a knight for what seems like a positional advantage. Black, faced with the prospect of passive defense, chooses a bolder, albeit riskier path. This pawn push isn't just a pawn move, it's a cry for counterplay, a declaration that black isn't willing to simply wither under pressure. The king's pawn, now a twin, is thrust into the fray, aiming to disrupt white's carefully constructed pawn chain and open lines. A desperate attempt to inject chaos into white's elegant order. It's the human element, the will to fight back, even when the odds seem stacked against you. This is where chess transcends mere calculation and becomes a dramatic narrative of resilience. The rook exchange on move 17, a decision that seemed to simplify the position, has now brought us to a point where white, with a subtle knight maneuver, is poised to unleash a positional vice, turning the once steady queenside pawns into a potential Achilles heel for black. The queen, feeling a sudden chill from the knight's menacing advance, retreats to a more familiar hunting ground, seeking the safety of the d8 square and perhaps a moment to regroup after that explosive exchange. But with white's knight now a permanent resident in the enemy camp, black's king feels a bit like a celebrity at a disorganized paparazzi scrum, exposed and vulnerable from all angles. And that queenside pawn, now looking rather lonely after its daring raid, suddenly feels like the last defense in a siege. The queen, a relentless hunter, now repositions, eyeing a fresh assault on black's king. And with the rook sliding to a6, black, having weathered the storm of white's central pressure and king's side pawn push, now seeks to activate this passive piece and perhaps disrupt white's carefully constructed pawn chain, transforming a defensive posture into a counter-attacking threat that will demand white's immediate and undivided attention. The rook, no longer a pawn's shield on the 7th rank, now claims the open c-file, a decisive pivot that dramatically shifts the battlefield's strategic gravity. With white's rook now a relentless sentinel on the open c-file, Black's king, escaping the immediate storm, tucks itself away on the 7th rank. A subtle acknowledgement of the coming tempest. Ah, the moment of truth, where queen and king finally convene their royal court, and white unleashes a daring gambit, an invitation to a duel, thrusting the queen forward to that daring h3 square, a move that whispers of ambition and potential peril, reminiscent of a seasoned diplomat stepping onto a volatile stage, subtly probing for weaknesses, ready to orchestrate a symphony of threats or, perhaps, facing an immediate counterstrike that could unravel the entire composition. The game hangs in the balance. And suddenly, the rook from b7, a pawn in this complex battle, shifts to b6, not to defend, but to attack. It's like an unassuming waiter suddenly pulling out a saber, aiming directly at white's king's flank. A bold maneuver that threatens to unravel the carefully constructed pawn chain and expose the king to a storm of queenside pressure. This isn't just a rook shuffle. It's a calculated gamble, a whisper of defiance in the face of a seemingly dominant white army, forcing the opponent to reconsider their entire strategy. A psychological ploy that asks, can you truly ignore this burgeoning threat on your wing? The silent sentinel, the rook, finally finds its voice, unleashing a devastating check that slices through black's previously impregnable fortress, forcing a desperate dance to save the king and revealing the precariousness of an exposed monarch. The rook, freed from its prison on the 1st rank, suddenly finds itself on a stage, a king of the open highway, and black, recognizing this dramatic shift, desperately tries to orchestrate a counterattack, a desperate dance of defiance against the encroaching enemy on his own turf. With the rook on the 8th rank now a formidable specter, white's qg3 finally commits to the inevitable confrontation, a calculated gamble on pinning the black queen to its king and unleashing a torrent of tactical possibilities that could shatter black's precarious defense. The game, a carefully constructed fortress of positional play, suddenly sees a desperate gambit to disrupt white's menacing knight and pry open the queenside. A bold, almost reckless, stroke that could either herald a beautiful counterattack or expose black's king to a brutal, swift end. And just when you thought the dust had settled, white unleashes a surprise. A tactical grenade tossed into the heart of black's previously impregnable fortress. The rook, awakened from its slumber on the c-file, now stares down black's king with a chilling intensity, hinting at a potential mating net that could ensnare the entire black monarch. This isn't just about material exchange anymore. It's a bold declaration of intent. A dramatic shift from positional maneuvering to an all-out assault that black must now navigate with absolute precision, lest they find themselves on the wrong side of a swift and brutal checkmate. The audacious gambit by white, launching the rook all the way to a8, has forced black into a perilous corner, and this quiet redeployment of the queen, pivoting to e6, is the only lifeline offering a breath of air. A desperate attempt to stabilize the kingside before the inevitable storm breaks. The trap is sprung, and white, with a grim sort of inevitability, has finally corralled the rogue rook. But a single capture in a complex endgame is rarely the end of the story. Is it? This isn't simply about winning material. It's about dissecting a position where black's queenside initiative, once a vibrant tapestry of potential, has begun to fray at the edges. The a-pawn will march. Yes, but at what cost to the king's sanctuary? White's pieces, so long patiently aligning like soldiers on parade, now awaken with a predatory glint, their eyes fixed on the now exposed monarch. The question isn't if black has made mistakes, but rather, how many and how dire their consequences will prove to be. The tempo has shifted, and the air thickens with the scent of a decisive encounter. The rook on a4 now feels like a shark circling wounded prey. And with 36, qf5, black deliberately shoves a juicy piece of bait right into its waiting jaws, a tantalizing queen sacrifice that threatens to unravel white's entire attacking structure if accepted. The queen finds herself out on a limb, a lone predator now facing the relentless march of white's forces. And with this invasion, the king's sanctuary begins to crumble. With a desperate lunge for the king, black unleashes a final, defiant thunderclap, aiming to shatter white's meticulously constructed fortress and expose the monarch to the storm. The king, finally free from the suffocating embrace of the center, scurries to safety, a tiny boat seeking harbor from an approaching storm. A final desperate gambit, the rook slides into the eye of the storm, a thunderclap threatening to shatter white's carefully constructed fortress, daring the king to step out from behind his pawn shield into the tempest that has been brewing since move 1, promising a chaotic whirlwind of counterplay where every piece becomes a potential weapon. And that humble pawn chain on the queenside, so painstakingly built, now hangs precariously in the balance, a testament to the volatile nature of this endgame where even the most robust defenses can crumble under a decisive, audacious assault. The threat of the lone rook, now resurrected from its island exile, suddenly becomes white's trump card, a viper coiled and ready to strike the black king's precarious sanctuary on the 7th rank, forcing a desperate defensive scramble where every pawn pushed is a gamble against the crushing weight of this newly aggressive piece. The dust has settled from white's audacious rook invasion, leaving black's king exposed on the 1st rank. But with this timely counter-thrust, black ignites a desperate defense, rerouting the queen to a crucial central square and luring the white monarch into a perilous tango. With the rook, it's a bold gambit, a roll of the dice where the very survival of black's position hinges on creating enough chaos to distract from the lurking danger, transforming a precarious defense into an active fight for initiative. With white finally pushing the f-pawn, it's like a chess player who's been staring at a perfectly good bottle of wine for hours, finally deciding to uncork it. This isn't just about pawn structure. It's about unlocking the asterisk potential of the king's bishop on c1, giving it a clear escape route, a fresh perspective, and crucially, a way to redeploy it more actively without compromising the king's safety. For 39, rc2, a move that felt like black had a tactical trick up their sleeve. This f3 is white's subtle but firm retort, a declaration that their monarch is no longer a sitting duck, but a strategic asset ready to reposition for the coming skirmishes. It's the kind of quiet move that can be more devastating than a flashy sacrifice, sowing the seeds of future discomfort for black and proving that sometimes the most powerful moves are the ones that don't scream for attention, but simply open up the chessboard. And so, with the dust settling after white's rather aggressive rook maneuver, black finds himself in a peculiar, yet perhaps calculated, predicament. The rook on a7, a formidable presence just moments ago, now feels a bit isolated, like a knight misplaced in the opponent's territory. Black, sensing this slight imbalance, unleashes the asterisk road 2, a move that speaks volumes about intent, like a poker player pushing all their chips into the pot after a long, contemplative stare. It's a bold declaration, a clear signal that black isn't content to merely defend. They are actively looking to disrupt white's carefully constructed pawn structure and pry open lines that were meant to remain stubbornly shut. This isn't just about material. It's about initiative, about seizing the initiative and forcing white to answer a direct challenge to their central control. A challenge that could unravel the entire game if not met with precise defense. A desperate gamble, a knight's last stand. leaping into the fray like a knight charging a fortress gate, hoping to find a weakness, a forgotten key, or perhaps simply a glorious demise in the enemy's heartland. The Black King, having sidestepped the immediate threat of that marauding rook, now finds a moment of reprieve. But this is no time for celebration. It's a frantic scramble to consolidate, to pull back from the precipice before White's relentless pressure crushes everything. The rook's journey to *d4, far from being a simple recapture, is a desperate attempt to gain breathing room, to offer a pawn as a shield and hopefully, just hopefully, disrupt the overwhelming coordination of White's forces. It's like trying to push back a tidal wave with a single bucket. The intention is noble. The effort is valiant. But the sheer power of the incoming wave is a stark reminder of the daunting task ahead. Can this seemingly small act of defiance truly reroute White's attack? Or is it merely a fleeting distraction before the final, crushing blow? The ghost of Fischer himself seems to whisper on the wind as White unleashes this devastating knight maneuver, a breathtaking echo of classic tactical brilliance. A knight fork so sharp it could carve a statue. After Black's queen was lured out, a seemingly innocent move to protect the pawn, White found the hidden dagger, poised to cleave through the king and queen. A fatal blow from which there is no recovery. A true checkmate is imminent scenario. Not by checkmate, but by a crushing material loss. The king, cornered like a rat in a maze, makes a final, desperate dash for freedom, a desperate gamble in the face of an inevitable checkmate. The king, like a cornered animal, tries to burrow deeper, but the wolf has found the scent. And 43. RB4 is the crushing blow that seals its fate, a brutal demonstration of how even the most intricate defensive structures crumble under relentless pressure, turning a tactical skirmish into a king hunt that exposes the vulnerable underbelly of Black's position. The battlefield shifts again, and Black, sensing a sliver of opportunity amidst the relentless pressure, rolls out the rook to a more active square, aiming to disrupt White's entrenched forces and perhaps, just perhaps, find some counterplay before the net tightens completely. The storm has broken, and the board has been swept clean of its complexities, leaving a stark, tactical endgame where every tempo, every pawn, every piece is amplified under the harsh glare of the clock. White, with a decisive rook swing, is essentially saying, enough of the maneuvering, the subtle threats, the delicate dance, let's get down to business and see who's got the nerve to press the advantage. This isn't just a capture. It's a calculated simplification, an aggressive divestment of material that forces Black into a reactive posture, hoping to survive the ensuing chaos rather than dictate the play. The question now is whether Black can navigate this brutal clarity, or if the sudden lack of pieces will leave them exposed, like a diver suddenly finding the water much shallower than anticipated. And so, with a flick of the wrist that echoes 1,000 chess duels, Black offers up the pawn, a sacrificial lamb to the wolves of central control, hoping to unravel White's tightly woven defensive tapestry before it constricts him entirely. The queen, having danced back to safety, now eyes the checkered battlefield with a newfound purpose, preparing to unleash a subtle but potent threat that forces Black to acknowledge the relentless pressure on their weakened pawn structure. And with a sigh of resignation, Black unveils the final, desperate gamble, a pawn pushed forth like a lone soldier charging into a blizzard, hoping against hope that this relentless advance will finally choke White's kingside assault and offer a sliver of breathing room. But oh, the icy chill that washes over this position tells a different story. For this pawn's march is less a triumphant charge and more a mournful echo. A final, poignant whisper of a defense that was perhaps destined to crumble all along. With the board now resembling a battlefield after a furious skirmish, White drops the queen onto a square that feels less like a bold advance and more like a final, desperate plea for clarity, essentially saying, okay, you've pushed every pawn, played every trick, and tangled up my knight like a lost balloon string. Now where do we go from here?